My name is Themba Themba meaning faith, hope, trust. Isakibi meaning Lord of the boat, Master of the sea. My first language was isiZulu from the Bantu. I was taught Portuguese by my original captors and Dutch by their successors. So I beg your indulgence in my feeble attempt at using the English tongue. I was born in Namibia, what the English call Angola, the West Cape, South Africa, in the year 1670. Born by the sea, for the sea. Indeed, I could swim before I could walk. Before I was 10, I could pilot through inland passages. Lagoons and barrier reefs presented no problem to me. I could negotiate shorelines, low tide or high. I knew water markings and wind speed, could navigate with full moon or no moon at all. I was a boatman who saw 15 rains before I was kidnapped and brought to the shores of America. As a child, I was besieged by many stories of slave catchers who, in the dead of night, stole children from their villages. Countless stories of black devils who dragged little ones to slave pens where they were never seen again. Many stories of the white-eyed ghosts who put people in the bellies of big boats and sailed them to the end of the earth. In my 15th year, fortune would befall that I become the narrative and render legitimate all the old wives' tales I had heard. For I found myself chained and manacled in the hold of the slave ship King Charles. My words cannot do justice to the misery attached to the journey. The totality of the suffering defies description. Suffice it to say that no human should suffer such, and I can imagine no hell worse than the belly of a slave ship. The hold is a dark place, void of the sun. We were only brought to half deck when we were fed and washed. I thereby lost track of the days, so there was no way I could measure how long we were at sea. When we landed upon these shores, I could understand but few words and was removed to being pushed and shoved by way of communication. However, I was pointed out as a boatman, an able seaman who knew ships and sailing. Although I did not at the time know the names of them, my early experience had shown me how to pilot a galleon, a cutter, an East Indiaman, a sloop, and even a Guineaman. If it could float, I could sail it. I learned that the vessel I sailed in on was owned by Frederick Philippe, and that he owned everything in every direction I looked. North, south, east, or west. He owned all the land and all the maritime as well. My first 3 years was in the pure service as a slave, but because of my craft and swift grasp of my circumstance, I was granted manumission my 4th year. This grant was not without warrant. Indeed, I had earned my freedom. You see, within those 3 years, I had steered the Beaver, the New Netherland Indian, the Pearl, the Morning Star, and the vessel on which I sailed in, the King Charles. Further, I had earned the favor of the Mrs. Margaret Phillips, who was wont to teach me in the way of manners and cartography. She was also wont to boast on the swiftness of my apprenticeship. I clearly recall my first voyage as a navigator on the Pearl. As we spotted the shoreline of Madagascar, we were overtaken by a swift-sailing cutter captained by Adam Baldridge, a bandit who was of some extensive repute. I soon learned that Captain Baldridge was in league with my owner, Master Philippe, and that this was just the first of many encounters with the slaver. It was revealed also that Captain Baldridge was not the only pirate with which Mr. Philippe did business. I also learned that, as genteel as she was, the Mrs. Margaret was no stranger to the scabbard and sword. My third exploration was of such significance that the story bears telling. I was now used to being at the helm, the captain only being responsible for such duty at landfall or at such time when the sea was exceedingly distasteful. It is no light fare keeping a ship steady, fighting mast and keel and sail. On this day, we collected no less than 50 poor souls off the coast of Guinea. I remember there being 40 men, 8 women, and 2 children, a boy of perhaps 10 and a girl of perhaps 7, whom all were in dire disrepair, to say the least. A part of my duties had evolved to interpreting, or it is better said, trying to interpret for my countrymen. On this occasion, the cargo, as they were called, was being offloaded from the Beaver and carried by dinghy and cockboat to the Pearl. The wretched souls were thrown into the small craft 10 at a time. This was one of the few voyages where we did not ferry to port. The enslaved were brought aboard up gangplank. One of the wretched, I recall, having no shoes, slipped and fell. His neck hit the brow and was broken. We watched him drift with the tide, and no one retrieved the poor soul's body. What made this day even more outstanding in the mind of this sailor is I was blessed by God to look into the eyes of a woman that I knew would never remain enslaved. There was a fierceness in her gaze that caused me to immediately fear for her life, for I knew that she would be tossed overboard if she raised enough ruckus. The scoundrels with whom I sailed would sooner throw a winch to the sharks than put up with insolence. Yet, somehow, I knew she would survive. There was an uprightness to her shoulders and a pride in her gaze that brought my thoughts back to her almost daily. One warm spring afternoon, more than a year later, I was docking at Schreier's Hook after sailing some 10 nauticals up Hudson's River. I remember feeling good as I had successfully negotiated trade with the Manhattoes for more than 100 pelt of mink and sable. Master Philippe was wont to trade with the Mohicans, with the Sinsink, the Tappans, and most all the Delaware people. This duty fell upon me because of my apprenticeship and my ability to befriend most all of the natives. I remember she was walking toward the sawmill, carrying a bushel on her head, and my heart felt like a sail blasted by a powerful nor'easter. It was her of the fierce eyes. She walked with such grace and purpose, and I remember my thinking, she walks like a smooth-sailing ship, and the fierceness in her eyes will weather all storms. She was the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. She was the forlorn wench I had first seen manacled in the hole of the Beaver, ragtag and torn. Now she was a maiden fair from Guinea, a queen-like and stately. She was Isate, and I knew in my heart she would one day be my bride.